Okay, this is episode 11 of Esports Salon, my industry talk show. And the topic of the show, unusual lineup, right? I'm starting straight away with the topic. But see, the thing is, the topic of the show is monetizing esports content. And I have to say, it's very difficult to do. I've had challenges with that myself. But thanks to Esportspools, who pay me massive amounts of sponsorship, I think this one podcast will be fine, actually. It will be, if anything, this is like, it's kind of fitting, it's like thematically, it's the exception to the rule, right? Because obviously I make way too much for this, quite frankly, tawdry production, whereas some fantastic people in this chat, sometimes struggle or have had hard times in their lives, which again, I can't really empathize with it. I wouldn't presume to know. I just, success is my tragedy in life. That's what I have to deal with. We all have our own burden. You know that, Travis, right? So our guests for this episode will go around the overlay. On my right, in the top right box, because that's how I think of him, my right-hand man, but at the top of his field, on the best of his game. Obviously, it's Travis Gafford, formerly known as...
It's so great. Yeah, we can't see your overlay when we're doing the show, so there's so much anticipation on who it is,
That's why I keep it nice and vague, so you're not quite sure where I'm going with it. You don't, and I'll just let your own ego decide whether or not you were disappointed or happy with that. So, obviously, better known to some, mainly just people on Reddit, as T Nomad, or SOTL Travis, all the old names, a bit like when Puff Daddy used to be known as Puff Daddy in the 90s. Still Puff Daddy to me, but Diddy to others. Tried to name himself Love, apparently, recently, like Brother Love or something. But, I mean, I don't know why that was the tipping point where they were like, that's ridiculous. How can Diddy name himself Brother Love? Like, what are you people even talking about? But Diddy is more ridiculous, isn't it? Forget the fact he was called Puff Daddy. Do you know... Like, I won't go into a whole diatribe, but just look up what the word puff means in slang and English. Can't even believe that was an actual name he was going with. But, maybe he was trying to send me a message. I don't know. So keep it going anyway. Travis Gafford, obviously formerly of, I like to think most fondly of OnGamers. Haven't heard that name in a long while, have we? No, you haven't, because that's not a story Travis would tell you. And just referencing the meme there. And then obviously after that, he later worked with Yahoo Esports.
Yep. Helped run it right into the ground. That's kind of what I'm.
But who knew Yahoo would end up seeding ground as one of the industry leaders and ultimately having to shut down some of their divisions? I couldn't have ever seen that coming thematically. It was just way out of left field for me. So keep moving. So in the bottom right hand corner, just because that's actually where he is on a traditional map of the world, is Riad Chikhani, who a lot of you are going to say, well, that's not really like, the name value isn't there as much, it's not like Travis Gafford, first of all, hasn't just put the name words Travis Gafford with everything he's ever done. So yeah, obviously, Riad actually lets his work speak for himself in some ways, doesn't need as much attention and love as some people in the industry do. But all you need to know about Riad is, he's here to counterbalance the others, right? Because obviously Travis, Yahoo shut down. He's trying to figure out where he's going in his career. Joe over here, it worked for a while, that sort of, that summer hobby of having a website and that, but it's all shut down now, that blowing that popsicle stand, it's over for him. So he's going to more be talking like nostalgically about the good times, And then to counterbalance, the two... I mean, there's no other way to say it than losers in some ways. I don't make the terms up. I didn't make the rules. We have to have two winners, right? So obviously there's me contrasted up here, and down there there's Riad, who again, you won't know by name value, but he's basically behind the Gamers Empire. And I say Gamers Empire because originally Gamers was a website, right? But now what he's done is, rather than think, I'd like to beat all the other websites, he thinks, I'd like to eat all the other websites. And he just buys every other website and makes it into Gamers. Except, notably, I did notice, when he bought DotEsports, somehow on that one, it's like he weighed it up or had some sort of focus group or something in some think tank somewhere in Sydney. And they decided, actually, DotEsports is a better name than Gamers. So he went, the other way. I'm going to make this company into DotEsports. So I don't quite even know the distinction myself, and I actually work for him. So that's all you need to know about the way his media empire works. But how you doing, mate? How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. Great to be here.
One of the first times on one of these shows, obviously, so we'll see. Obviously, he's come in with top billing there. He's got to deliver some straight fire now, otherwise people are going to wonder, how did someone like that make it to the top, aside from shady business deals, which we're all just assuming. I mean, it was on everyone's mind anyway, I'm not alleging anything. The last guest in this one, I've already sort of preempted him a little bit, is Joe Ragazzo. Also, not necessarily name value, but he was behind the much beloved Slingshot Esports, which was a starting place for many people. I think launching place as well for some. Obviously, DK got a lot of his CSGO reports written on there, whereas before he was just a guy doing it on Twitter and on YouTube. We had Sluchu really kind of came into his prime there, doing a lot of his writing.
According to Reddit, it was just translated clickbait. So I don't know.
It wasn't beloved in the League of Legends subreddit.
No. Yeah. I mean, what I loved about that
page multiple times a day.
Like, here's what's funny about that though, is even though on one level, right, I can understand why they said that, because even though they're actually wrong, like, you know, like Emily and Kelsey wrote for them at the very end. True, through most of its history, because it started out in CS and other games, it didn't have tons of like League of Legends articles. But even so, the way they phrased that itself is a bit suspect. Like, all it was, you see, you notice, by the way, hater always just phrases things so they sound so easy, as though you sort of do it for 5 minutes while doing a fucking yo-yo with the other hand waiting for your noodles to come out of the microwave, you know. All they did is just translate Korean, one of the hardest languages actually in the world for anyone with an English language background to learn. They just translated Korean articles that otherwise could not be read, put them on their website, and then expected us, who eagerly wanted to read them, to click, and therefore for them to make money for that translation. Again, translation, one of the jobs which is the highest paid in the world per hour, without any sort of actual skill beyond the immense amount of skill it takes to know 2 incredibly different languages. So, yeah, Joe, what the fuck were you thinking? Think you should make money for that?
I'm embarrassed. I mean, wait till they find out that Andrew also speaks Japanese. I mean, the kid has literally no skills whatsoever. So, I don't know.
I like
that. The L on that one.
Like, he really is planning for the future. You know, he doesn't know how that whole Asian scene's going to work out. He needs like, you know, other options. He needs a way out if he has to. So okay, the topic of this episode is quite a serious, quite a somber topic. It is monetizing esports content. And the reason why this is actually a weird topic is because obviously everyone in here at some point has essentially made an income off monetizing esports content. People like me and Travis have obviously been doing it like full time for a number of years now. But actually, it seems to me as a general, I mean, I'm an outsider outside of my own stuff, you know, I maybe know a little bit of people who also work in the industry who tell me their rates, etc. But I don't work for, you know, ESPN or whatever the big famous sites are in that sense. So I have to say, as an outsider, with all the cancellations and things being closed down and people having all these problems at the moment, it feels like, despite the fact esports itself is perhaps stronger than ever, like, you know, millions of dollars poured into it, television deals, massive leagues, and insane viewing numbers that get broken all the time, isn't monetization and the esports journalism side of things, feels like it's in a terrible place. What do you think, Travis?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I don't know how good monetization is across the esports industry as a whole. And so I think what is unique about media is that if you look across the media landscape, not just in esports, but across gaming media and sports and politics and all this stuff, media is in a very tough place.
Yes.
So you kind of combine both the problems of media with the problems of esports monetization, and that's pretty much it. You know, it's very, very hard to make this thing work. And I think you have a lot of startups and teams and leagues and everything that are fine to lose money for a while, and then you don't really see that on the media side because these guys are already bleeding in other areas. So I think that's one of the reasons why we've seen less investment in esports media from, you know, across the board in comparison to like TV and startups and all that stuff. And I think that's also why you see the investments that do occur, you know, that's something where they struggle.
Sure. So Riad, even though I joked, like, you know, everything's going great for you, etc., if you're buying up all these websites and you've consolidated them all and you've built out the GAMURS brand and now you've got DotEsports, which was actually a very established brand, obviously, within esports journalism, right? People might naively think, right, well, you're the one guy in this group who's got all the answers. But actually, if I put it to you this way, there's a reason why, despite buying all these sites, you don't have, you know, if I made a top 10 list of writers, you don't have all 10 writing for your site, you know? There's a problem, right, when it comes to monetizing like the biggest content creators, for example. Like, you can definitely get someone who's willing to work at X amount, who's fairly new, you know, and start building themselves out. But if you're a top creator, there's a reason why they're spread around the industry. What would you say on this topic of the difficulty of monetizing it? Because in theory, if you want to buy all the websites, you want all the writers as well, right?
Yeah, well, in theory, that's definitely correct. I want to second what Travis said. Media in a whole is in a bit of a tough spot right now with the rise of Facebook and Google and their advertising empires media. It doesn't matter if you're acquiring or you have engaged the same users, you're then more likely that publishers to receive less money because more of the advertisers are going through Google and Facebook, which provide a much better return on investment, I'd say, or that's what the sentiment is. From a monetization point of view in regards to the esports side of things, yeah, we obviously would like to have the top writers working for DotEsports or across other brands where we publish content. But at the end of the day, it's a numbers game. And if you're paying a writer X, you want to be able to ensure that you're going to get some return on investment. And if you've hired all the top writers who deserve to be paid very well and to be compensated fairly, then you need to make sure that there is a return of investment. Otherwise, you're going to continue to bleed money at a rapid rate, which as a result will cause you or the publisher that you're running to shut down, unfortunately. So you do want to ideally, but it doesn't always happen like that.
Okay, Joe, I don't know if you've ever seen one of these shows, but I have a very simple formulaic way to start the show. But I'll kind of let everyone behind the curtain now. What I do is I start out by doing my intros, where everyone has to sit in silence for 6 minutes while I just denigrate everything they've ever done, but in a friendly, amiable way, And then what I always do is to get people going, break the ice. I always ask people a directed question specifically for them, and then I move into the period where, absolutely everyone's free to just jump in. So I was going to be, thinking up a question while Riad was talking there, but he said at the end that if you can't figure out a way to monetize it, you're just going to bleed money out, and eventually, whatever your own business publishers is just going to have to shut down eventually. I feel like in some ways he's actually set you up perfectly for you to come in the conversation. So, jokes aside, what were the issues with Slingshot of having? I mean, you had a number of top writers. You had, I'm sure, many, many millions of hits on the website. You had people, despite the jokes you made about Reddit, etc. Some of these pieces had a claim to them, were considered some of the best pieces. What were the broad strokes? What were the big problems, do you think, in trying to monetize a website like that?
I think the biggest problem is ad blocking. I mean, I know that when I launched Slingshot, for people that don't know, I manage another website that covers American politics. And so I think I came into running Slingshot with some preconceived notions or assumptions that were off. The primary one among those was the level of ad blocking that would exist in esports. And so when we launched Slingshot, we basically said, all right, we're going to try to get to a certain size where we can either drive enough revenue where we're like close to breaking even and we're making enough revenue to continue to grow. As soon as we started to see the ad block rates approaching 70, 75, sometimes 80%, we realized that was sort of out of the question. And then what we decided to do was sort of plan B, which is, okay, we want to get to a certain size where we will be able to get some sort of investment to continue to grow and to continue to build out the brand and then leverage, our growth in other ways. And so there's really two issues here. There's the revenue and then there's the investment. And those are two separate issues. And we managed to sort of we fell short on both for different reasons. But the biggest reason was definitely ad blocking. And I think another issue in terms of, and this sort of speaks to Riad's point about the return on investment, the biggest names don't necessarily drive the most traffic. They don't necessarily create the biggest audiences. Yeah. A news hit that Andrew would do about like one of these Korean stories, for example, like a translation would consistently do far more traffic than a Stu column. And that's not an insult.
And by the way, just as context for people, that's because obviously in a positive way, they are Reddit bait. If a title that says something about Faker saying something catches fire and it gets people's imagination, it could get to the top of Reddit, whereas odds are a Stu piece, even a good one, it might crack the front page if it's doing well, but it's not going to get as many raw hits, right? Even though qualitatively, we can all look at it and say that's a much better piece of journalism.
Yeah, exactly. And so my thinking was we didn't want to just chase traffic. I wanted to have a quality site because our long-term plan was always not to be dependent solely on advertising. And so I thought building the brand through having good names was a important move. I mean, in the end, obviously, it ended up not really mattering. But so that's the short answer is really ad blocking was the biggest factor. Because I think another thing people don't realize is, I don't know how inside baseball we want to get, but when you're talking to advertisers or ad networks, they don't just look at your traffic. They do ask, like, how many page views do you have? But what they really want to know is how many impressions you can serve. And an impression, for those who don't know, is like a little box that you might see on a screen or a banner, those ads. And advertisers are also generally pretty lazy, so they want to deal with as few places as they possibly can. And so when you have, just for easy numbers, like let's say you had 1 million page views, they're not seeing 1 million page views, because if 75% have an ad blocker, they're seeing you have 250,000 page views or something like that. And at that point, it's like, you're too small for us to waste our time advertising on you, when we could just go, like Riad said, to Facebook, or just to a larger site, or like another network. And so it becomes a scale issue, and it sort of makes the problem even worse.
Yeah, I can kind of speak to similar things on the Yahoo side. So I have to be really careful with what I say, just because of NDAs and all that stuff. I would rather not have Verizon lawyers knocking on the door. And so I'll preface this by just also pointing out that, Yahoo Esports shut down, and there weren't revenue issues cited. It was more like Verizon aligning with their core strategy, and there were 2,100 people reportedly or allegedly that got laid off. And so, there were other issues at play. Speaking to the ad block issue, though, this was something. First off, I was really, really happy when Riad came out, what was it, like 6 months ago, and talked about seeing an 80% ad block rate, because up until then, I had always wanted to talk openly about ad block rate, but again, that was kind of working at these bigger companies. They don't always want you to disclose stuff, and so I can't see what ours were at these places, but I could say I was not surprised when Riad quoted 80%, and so it was nice that I was able to talk about that later when I talked about surrender at 20 even. But I think that what we did say publicly at conferences and talking to advertisers were that we had identified that this was an issue, and that was why. And most people will not have known this because they run ad block. Yahoo Esports does not run ads, right? Like, which is very, very unconventional and a very, very different business for Yahoo to try to create a website and not use, standard banner ads and ads across the site. And so the monetization strategies were always going to be away from that. And it was a push to try to figure something out, simply because going into it, they knew the ad block rates were going to be pretty atrocious. So, I think that was something we experienced too, and even had to try to figure out a way to deal with it.
Okay, so Riad, I think there's a couple of ways we can go at this. Okay, so like, first of all, let's go from the angle of like kind of Joe did there, like raw numbers, because this is one thing that people who are in esports but maybe not in the publishing side of things might still be confused about, because they might think, right, okay, they know, for example, that ads don't make that much money generally, so they'll think naively, right, well, in that case, it's just a numbers game. If you get to a certain number, you can justify it. But as Joe's saying here, sometimes it's like outrageous the numbers you need to make what's actually not that much money from pure ad rev, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think it's an education piece that needs to happen in esports. I'm not going to ramble on about ad block. I think we all know how detrimental that is to the industry, but the misconception is that if you grow your user base and you continue to grow it, and then you hit some sort of scale, that you're going to begin delivering or receiving a lot more revenue. Well, the thing is, if you're working with ad block numbers anywhere from 65 to 85% of the industry, it doesn't matter how much you're growing your user base. If no one is seeing advertisements, you're not going to be deriving any revenue whatsoever. What is going to be happening, though, is you're paying for that journalist, you're paying for the server cost, you're paying for dozens and dozens of things that no one really accounted for when starting up the publisher, that just continue to add up and add up and add up. At the end of the day, ad block is there, and ad block is there to stay. And there are a few different ways, not necessarily not to combat it, but to work with it. Before, probably about 5 or 10 years ago, everybody would say that content is king. Well, at this moment, mobile is king. With mobile traffic comes the sort of mass decrease of ad block. To give you a bit of transparency, and I love being transparent with our figures, our mobile ad block rate is 2%, which means that a majority of our mobile users are receiving advertisements, which allows us to monetize. And that is really beneficial in the long run. Whereas, again, as you all know, our desktop ad block rate is significantly higher. So it's a matter of balancing it out and figuring out what's the best way to actually monetize your content without having to fight the users. Because at the end of the day, putting up those little banners that say, oh, please remove us if you like our content, or whitelist us or whatever to support us, when you're communicating to millions of people a month with your content, the majority of people that will skim past that sort of image without even looking at it, it's probably 95%. So it doesn't move the needle. So it's a matter of identifying where the industry is going and figuring out how to play with it rather than how to fight it and combat it.
I mean, I know, for example, that essentially was the business model that the Score had when they came into esports, which was, if you notice, so if you saw in League of Legends or CSGO, there were many events last year where they would have an actual full-on sponsorship where the host had to keep saying at the, the beginning of every segment, brought to you by the Score Esports, we have a mobile app. And the whole reason was they put all their marketing budget, it seems, into pushing you to the mobile app. Now, they never said, go on our website and you can read this interview with it was always mobile app. And that's exactly why, because they knew that to some extent, ad block almost doesn't exist on mobile. At least 99% of people, as you're kind of saying here, don't really use it. So therefore, you don't even need as many hits. Obviously, you're just raking in what actually esports would be like if ad block didn't exist, sort of. So does that model actually work though?
Yes and no. It works if you have mass marketing budgets. Once again, DotEsports has about 3 million readers a month, and we have an Android and an iOS application. When we put up the banner advertisement, when we put up the download the app link and all that sort of stuff, a very small minority of people will actually click on that, which means that if you want to promote your app, you're either going to be going, again, through Facebook, through Twitter, through Google, through sponsoring tournaments and whatnot to be able to bring that app in front of more and more eyeballs. It's not enough just to advertise it on your platform, because the way that you derive traffic for esports and video game content is to either go through Google, or to go through Reddit, or even to go through Facebook. And the majority of the people that land on your website looking for that content only want to read that content and then nothing else. They want to consume what they've been told they're going to be reading, and then they're going to leave. And so the majority of the time, you're trying to push something to them that they're either not interested in or they just frankly don't care about, and it doesn't work. But if you do have the marketing budgets, mobile apps are absolutely fantastic. They can probably quadruple, if not quintuple, your engagement rate and the amount of times that a user is going to return a month.
Yeah, I will say though that in esports, it's so funny. This might be one of the most difficult audiences in the world to make content for, because obviously we've talked about ad block rates, blah 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 blah, but also this is like a very PC centric audience. So you'll probably see higher returns in other audiences if you're trying to push like a mobile initiative than you will in this audience, because they're used to going home from class or going home from work and sitting down in front of their computer and playing games and alt-tabbing in between and reading articles on Reddit and that kind of thing. Their consumption pattern is tremendously desktop-based. And so in a world where you are seeing a huge influx or movement from people reading articles and news on a laptop or desktop, and towards mobile, you just don't, there's way more inertia on the esports side, because these people are in front of PCs like the majority of their day. And so while it is good to try to push mobile, you're still, even in that world, you're still going to struggle, because this audience is still predisposed to not consume on mobile and instead consume on desktop.
I would also add that all things being equal, like if ad block was not an issue, you can monetize mobile at a far lower rate than desktop, simply because of real estate on the screen. So, if you were to talk to someone who's a publisher of non-esports content, you're like, yeah, I have this overwhelming desktop audience, to be like, well, that's freaking awesome. I wish that all of our readers always visited on desktop and never on mobile. Yeah. But the difference is the ad block usage, so it kind of throws that formula off.
Okay. Well, yeah, I fully agree with that. But again, I think it's a numbers game. If everybody was going to be visiting on desktop, then you're going to be seeing a much less sort of user number count, because everybody else is either traveling or they're just casually flicking on their mobile and they're either on Reddit or Facebook, and they see a piece of content that they go, oh, wow, this would be really awesome to read, and they click on it. So 100% fully agreed there. But at the end of the day, you sort of have to take what you get. And if the consumers are on their mobile, then you got to work with that. And I think that's the hardest part as well, because as a publisher, you're not fully in control. You have to sort of work with the trends and work with where the industry's at, and sort of just use the numbers. And people don't understand also that the origin of country or the location of your traffic is extremely important. If you have a significant amount of people, say, for example, in a developing country, you're going to receive a lot less, and I'm talking probably 80 to 90% less return on that user utilizing or reading your content, viewing the ads, serving impressions, than you would if somebody is in the USA or even UK and whatnot. And so that's something that you're never prepared to. You're never prepared in the beginning as a publisher, but then you have to get aware very quickly. And sometimes you have to adjust your methods of distribution and your methods of acquisition because you might be getting the wrong type of traffic.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point on the Esports Salon that I did with Thorin about Overwatch League. One of the things I was discussing is this global audience and sort of how that affects CPMs. For those that don't know, CPMs are the amount of money you can make per 1,000 impressions, ad impressions. I'm sure we'll talk about that more here in a second. But everybody loves to talk about how global the audience is for esports. It's like, it's not just the US, you've got all these fans in China and Korea and Asia and Europe and all that stuff. And that is really exciting and great. The problem is, and there are multiple issues with that on the advertiser front, to Riad's point, like, you can get multiple dollar CPM in a lot of cases in the US, depending on the advertisement, in the US and Canada. There's a little bit of a drop off when you go to Europe. And then whenever you're in like Asia or, like you said, developing countries, you could be getting like 15-cent CPMs, right? You're making essentially nothing for that. And so, I can speak to my YouTube channel, which gets only about 55% of its audience from North America, which is crazy to me because I literally and actively make fun of every other region on my YouTube channel, and yet they still keep coming. And so you can sort of see the effect there. Like if I, someone who's very NA-centric, covering NA-centric places, am getting only half of my audience from North America, and you realize there's a drop-off in income every time you have a user outside of North America, you can only imagine what it's like, especially whenever you have publications that are dedicated to a more global approach in their coverage, or trying to cover EU LCS, or trying to cover stuff that's happening in the East. So it's definitely a complication on that front as well, right? I'm worried that the show's just going to become a laundry list of like, yeah, we're fucked because of this, and we're fucked because of this, and we're fucked because of this. But I mean, it's worth, I think, talking about all that stuff. Okay.
So Riad, I actually had a topic I want to ask you about to start it off, which is, when you said before that line, I think it's a pretty good line to kind of repeat, is that even if someone has like a big name, that doesn't actually ensure that they make either A, a lot of traffic, or B, more importantly, enough traffic to justify what they might need to be paid based on either market value or just what they want personally. And so obviously this is something like Joe can speak to as well, and Travis himself is someone who'd be on the other end of the equation there. But I mean, I'll put it this way, we've had this discussion many times, because I'm obviously, I don't know anything about the numbers and how they convert, but I'll always come to you and tell you, this person's amazing, like we got to have them for the site. But then if you told me, the numbers don't add up for that, or they ask for too much, I mean, I can't say you're wrong. I don't even know the numbers, do I? So what's the problem there? Because obviously, listen, there are a few exceptional examples. Like, even in this chat here, people have to realize there are people who either have as big a name as me or Travis, or perhaps are even better in certain areas. I mean, depending on who we're talking about, but don't necessarily get anywhere near the amount of impressions or views or whatever it might be. And as an outsider, there's no rhyme or reason that if you don't follow their numbers, you wouldn't know actually that they don't get as many, but perhaps they want as much money or more or whatever. So what would you say on that topic? Because again, it kind of ties into that original question, right? Why can't you just hire all the best writers if you can buy every site?
Exactly right. That's a really good question. I think there's a few points in there to address. Number one is, I think the audience is about to get sick of what I'm going to say again, which is you have to follow the numbers. I think the numbers are the most important thing. Like I said earlier, you need a return on investment from those journalists. The thing that I want to talk about next, though, is you have to sort of build. Media is a three-tiered approach. You have content, you have distribution, and then you have audience. You always have to build the content first. Content is king. The statement "content is king" existed for a particular reason, because people want to consume really good content. They want to consume good storylines. But then you need to be able to distribute that content. It doesn't matter if you are creating content that is extremely insightful, or it's phenomenal, or it's even investigative journalism. If there is no one there to distribute it, or no one there to distribute to, then you're not going to be able to build an audience, which is where you derive the revenue from, which then justifies you creating that content. And then what you've done is sort of built that little cycle there. to sort of touch upon that in regards to why can't you hire the best journalists or the I'd say the highest quality journalists to your websites, because sometimes they won't be able to generate enough traffic to justify a means to the end. The means to the end, which again is completely negative, because if you're a business and you're investing X dollars every single month into a journalist, you need to be able to derive either a return then or have a strategy to move forward to be able to build a profitable business based off on that. So I hope that sort of answered the question. I can go a lot deeper into it, but again, it's all about the numbers. It's all about being able to distribute the content into the right mediums and to the right people. But again, if you can't get the right audience to consume that content, then you're not going to get a good return on that.
Yeah, I would add on and just say, oftentimes it's not even just a matter of how popular the person is. Oftentimes there's this cost factor, right? So it's not even like, getting a big personality, they're going to cost a lot of money, but oftentimes there's extra costs that come along with that. So for instance, if a media outlet wants to hire me, not only am I going to ask for $1 bajillion a year, because we all know I deserve it, but also, you have to hire, like Andrew from Slingshot can work at home. He can work wherever in the world. Yes. He can, so he can live someplace less expensive. He can do a lot of different stuff, and he can just be a one-man team. If you hire me, I have to be in Los Angeles near the LCS studio so I can interview these guys. Los Angeles costs are expensive. And not only that, but I need a producer, and I live right next to Hollywood. So you need a camera guy who's going to be able to shoot and edit for me and help me out with this stuff. And so now suddenly you've got a whole nother salary that you need to have attached to this. And so oftentimes, especially on the video front, which is a whole other dynamic that I'm sure we can get into, you have a lot of associated costs that go along with individuals, and you might not have that if you're just hiring, a staff writer who lives in Kentucky and can churn out, 15 news stories a day, and 3 of those will hit Reddit, and you'll get some good traffic.
Sure. So, Joe, you obviously had a site that had a whole bunch of big names on it, and so a naive fan might just say, okay, so maybe they just had to do more stuff. Like DK needed to break twice as many stories, and if he'd done all this, then it'd have been fine, right? What would you say to this issue of like having big names isn't necessarily counteracting the problem, right? It's just you're scaling it up a bit, but then the costs go up with them as well because they're big names. So how do you resolve that?
Yeah, well, the way a lot of places resolve it, and the way we attempted to resolve it is, right, on one hand, you want to have good reporters that are just focused on breaking news, and we wanted to let DK focus on that, and we wanted to let Stuchu write good columns because, again, like I've said, we wanted to have a good brand. We wanted people to enjoy our content, and inevitably, or eventually, we wanted people to like it to the point where they would pay for it. But a lot of places, what they do is you have these top shelf writers who are going to write columns, or they're going to periodically break news, and then you subsidize it by having news writers who write like 15 to 20 articles a day. And so you have this balance between names and output, and the output is meant to subsidize the big names, the columnists, the reporters, who maybe are not driving the traffic, but you want them on your site because you want to do good work. Otherwise, what's the point of the business? That breaks down, though, when the aggregation and the traffic is not generating the revenue necessary, not only to pay for itself, but to subsidize these other writers. And that's sort of the trap that we fell into. Now, I would say, though, I always thought that one of our problems was that we were undercapitalized, and that is in large part my fault. I feel like there is a point, like I could imagine a situation where, Duncan, maybe you and Richard and Travis all worked for the same place, and you could come up with some kind of revenue strategy where a publication goes out to advertisers and says, look, you're gonna advertise, and you're gonna advertise not just on our site, but across our influencers' channels. And that's creating much more revenue or much more value for an advertiser. And also, like, those ads are not going to be blockable because you're sponsoring it on a YouTube channel, they're on the site. Yeah. And so I could see a way in which maybe that would work. Obviously, I've never tried it, but I don't think it's as simple as big names don't drive revenue, which I don't think anybody was saying. I just wanted to make that point so the audience doesn't misunderstand.
Okay.
I'd like to touch up on that point. I think the concern that I have in regards to the general media landscape of esports and competitive gaming on that front, also, is a significant reliance on Reddit. I feel that a lot of these publishers, and this isn't to call out anybody currently in this industry, it's just a sort of general sort of reflection upon over the last year and a half, is people rely on Reddit way too much to derive traffic for their websites. I think if you're relying on Reddit for traffic, what you're going to have is a really tough time. Thing is, Reddit is very flaky. You're relying on something that you can't fully control. You're not building your own channel of distribution. It's not something that you can continue to churn out. To give you a bit of an example, the Gamers Group, we operate multiple Facebook pages. Through those Facebook pages, we provide content across our social profiles. One of them is the DotEsports page, which has just under 400,000 followers. By being able to cultivate a community on that Facebook page, we're able to then share the content that we find is going to be meaningful for that audience, to be able to then create traffic to the website and therefore generate revenue. By having a sole reliance on Reddit as your only distribution strategy, you're going to have a really big problem with that, because if you're not producing content that is getting upvoted, or you're not publishing it at the right time, or somebody else beat you to it, then the Reddit community will not sort of engage with that post, and therefore that article has then gone to waste. Whether you've paid them by a paper post or you're paying them a salary, that journalist is not going to then generate revenue for the business. And that's a big issue that I have right now in esports. A lot of these publishers that are currently operating or beginning to operate aren't focusing on building up their social channels where they can engage their users off the website as well. It's one thing to try to get somebody to click an article. It's another thing to try to get them to go and make a conscious decision to download your app. But it's extremely easy to convert your readers into social media followers should you be providing good content. And once you've done that, you've built a returning user. You're not having to go out there and acquire them again. And then you can sort of forecast a growth in traffic and therefore forecast a growth in revenue. And obviously, it's the most sustainable approach, in my opinion.
I would go a step further than that, even that, yes, Reddit obviously is unsustainable. And one of our primary goals from day to day was to just get away from the reliance on Reddit traffic, something we talked about every day. I, however, think that all media is in trouble relying on any platform, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Reddit. I mean, I've been in the publishing industry now, 5, 6, 7 years, and the Facebook algorithm can be just as volatile as any other platform. I mean, you can just Google Facebook traffic patterns and referral patterns, and you'll see over the years, there used to be able to stand up a Facebook page, and if it was news related, you'd be able to gain followers. It would be extremely easy, and the traffic would be through the roof. And Facebook has sort of moved away from, they've tweaked their algorithm to favor, video and different kinds of content. And so the reach of a particular news article is nowhere where it used to be, 5, 6 years ago. And so, that's a problem that I see on the horizon as well for everybody. I mean, I'd be interested to know, Riad, like the difference between before you acquired Dot and your ability or your focus on building the GAMURS Facebook page and the challenges that you might have had with that versus when you acquired DotEsports and you had the Facebook page, and just how much different that was to already have that built, and also just the growth you've seen in the DotEsports page since you've had it. Because obviously it must have grown really rapidly when they first launched it.
I fully agree with the point that you just made. The Facebook traffic is dwindling. My earlier point wasn't just regarding social. I feel that publishers, again, fully agree with you, media and publishers are in trouble just due to the changing nature of the industry. The landscape is different to what it was a year ago, and it's completely different to what it was 5 years ago. But it looks like everybody is still using that strategy and isn't sort of adopting new methods of being able to acquire users while, most importantly, engaging users. There was a great saying once that said it's significantly cheaper to keep a user coming back than it is to acquire a new one. And it's a brilliant way to build a business, because if you acquire one user and you have them come back 30 times a month, versus if you're only acquiring a user and then having them never come back, you have to acquire 30 of those people compared to one. But to answer your question, we saw a lot of growth. We saw a lot of growth when we acquired originally was a daily .esports page and then rebranded it into .esports. We saw probably about 80,000 new followers to that page. I think at one point you do reach a level of saturation when you're acquiring individuals in the esports community and with the .esports brand with just under 400,000 likes and followers, whatever you want to call it. We're sort of hitting that level where you stop growing unless you're branching out into different regions, unless you're branching out into different titles. You've pretty much hit, sort of a maximum, I'd say, ceiling for that. Prior to acquiring Dot, we had the GAMURS Twitter accounts, which had about 500,000 or so followers. And again, we were deriving traffic from that. But the way I've built the GAMURS group and now mainly our publishing channels from day one was to diversify your channels of acquisition. We would rely on Google for traffic on breaking news through Google News and Google AMP. We would rely on Facebook, on social traffic. We would rely on Reddit as well. We would rely on people direct visiting the website, which I think is the most important thing for a publisher to begin to do, is to focus on being able to convert its users into a loyal community. If people come back to your website of their own volition, that is a valued customer that you will have for the next 5-10 years, as long as you're producing the same content and as long as that is still in their interest. So I think that's where you get the most value as a publisher today, by building up a really powerful platform, building up great journalistic content, and having them want to come back on a day-to-day basis to consume that.
I have a bunch of stuff from both what you guys were talking about as very fascinating to me. So one, yes, going back to sort of the conversation about becoming non-Reddit dependent, I think that's a conversation everybody has. The problem is that it's very, 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 very difficult. So at Yahoo, the nice thing was, one, we were able to leverage the Yahoo network. So we'd have stories that would go on the front page of Yahoo, et cetera. And certainly it wouldn't be that surprising, I think, if it ever came out that the demographic of people using the front page of Yahoo aren't similar to the people that are using Reddit. But we were able to have value from there and I think find audience. But we also found a great deal of new audience off of YouTube. And so that was great because we were such a video-centric site, which is maybe a little different than what Slingshot and DotEsports are. We found a great deal of strength on YouTube and users, and so we were becoming less Reddit dependent, as it were, and our audience was coming from social channels as well. But I think, I don't think that a lot of people get into this and they're like, it's fine, we'll just harvest Reddit. I think the problem is that it's super, super hard, right? Like at the start of this year, I was talking to a group that had started to put together a esports media site, and one of them said to me in a very cocky way, they're like, the thing is, everybody talks about Reddit. Our plan is to be completely, we don't even care about Reddit 6 months from now. And I just started laughing because it's like, oh, yes, a brilliant plan. Yep. You'll just get off of Reddit in 6 months and everything will be fine. And it was seeded in, I think it came from a good place, and it just sort of illuminated a little bit of the naivety around this stuff. It's just like, yeah, just don't worry about Reddit. That's not a big deal. From my experience at Yahoo, the feeling, specifically speaking about Facebook, and I'm actually super fascinated to hear this. I'm not asking it as a challenge, but Riad, like, what has your experience been like with Facebook, and also Joe probably with Slingshot? We found it is incredibly hard to grow a Facebook page from zero. So I think if you have that kind of like ability to have 25,000, 100,000 people, and you can put a video there, which allows it to start getting, but the way they've changed the algorithm now, I don't think people like Facebook pages anymore. I mean, I guess there are some evidence, right, Riad, you're still growing your likes and stuff, but it's much more just you post a video and you hope that it kind of goes viral and then it starts getting shown to people. And so from my sense, it is really, really difficult. Like, we struggled with Facebook frequently, where it's like, it's hard in that it's like, maybe there's just this like point where you have to put in so much in order to get, and then you get the lift. But it's like, how much time do you spend resources making like Facebook centric videos, and do you spend on the platform and hope that's going to get you the return you need? Like, it was just so hard to get that vertical going, and so we ended up just putting a lot of resources into YouTube and Twitter And even our like individuals, the nice thing was we had a lot of big names working with us, so we were able to also try to push their personal brands and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what your experience growing the Facebook stuff has been, how you did it. Do you think that GAMURS, the Facebook page, could have gotten 100,000, 200,000, 300,000? Was the Facebook page a huge reason why you bought DotEsports? I mean, I assume that it probably was. I'm curious.
I thought that was one of the smartest acquisitions. I mean, in the time we were running Slingshot, when you acquired DotEsports and you got the Facebook page, I have to admit, I thought that was
because I used to look at the
brilliant acquisitions I've seen.
Facebook page with envy and just be like, I don't know how they did this. I mean, Dot was always been a very social media centric site, so I don't know what. I assume that it's hard for me to imagine that the DotEsports Facebook page was always the DotEsports Facebook page from 0 to 250, but maybe it was. I'm curious, Riad, what do you know that will tell us?
No, thank you. I appreciate the kind words. The DotEsports acquisition was one of my most exciting acquisitions. I think it was very helpful. You're 100% right. You need to invest upfront with no real sign of when you're going to grow, when you're going to sort of hit that curve where it's becoming meaningful, and when you're going to have a return, just in general. Thankfully for us, like I said, we bought the page when it was a lot larger. To answer your question, would the GAMURS page have hit 100,000 likes? Yeah, it would have, because we were dedicated to our vision and we were ensuring that we were publishing content that was relevant to the users. But you're 100% right. You need to be able to create meaningful video content, timeful video content as well.
When you say that, by the way, when you say that phrase, you're dedicated to your vision, right? Just clarify, because to someone who's an outsider, that sounds like you just really believed in what you're doing. But when you say dedicate, that means you like invested money and you actually had a whole team and that was like an actual goal, and you were probably doing campaigns that built into that, right? There was a mechanism. You didn't just sit there and go, I fucking really want this to work. And if it does, maybe I'll get that 100K. No, you put attention and effort and money into it, right?
Yeah, 100%. We didn't just sit there and go, we really want this to work, we really want this to work, why hasn't it worked? We put time, effort, and lots of money. A lot of people don't know, but we invested it. We've invested so far a significant amount of capital just in esports in general, through the wikis, through the upcoming product launches that we have, through our editorial stuff, through everything. So yeah, we've invested a significant amount of time and effort because we believe in what we do and we know why we're doing it, because we are esports fans ourselves. We are competitive gamers ourselves. We want to consume the content and use the platforms that we are building. So yeah, 100% I believe in the vision. So does the whole team. Would the GAMURS page have been built? Yeah, 100% it would have hit the 100,000, 200,000 followers. But again, it's all a matter of time. It's all a matter of how much money are you investing. If you invest more, you're going to get more out of it, but that doesn't always mean that it's the right approach.
Yes.
And even just a more specific question, like one of the issues we ran into, and I don't, the Facebook page we did a lot on, and we did actually do paid campaigns and stuff. But one of the other issues we ran into, I'm curious how you have handled this, is, one of the challenges in running an esports media site is that if I'm an esports fan, chances are I am either a League of Legends fan or a CSGO fan or a Dota fan. I am not all of these things. And so I can just go to reddit.com/r/League of Legends and never have to worry about any of this Dota, CSGO, whatever.
And you also have the problem where the algorithm, when you're not clicking on 2/3 of the content, if they had an equal distribution, you'd actually get limited amounts of.
Yeah, exactly. So if I'm producing a video about CSGO and I put it on this Facebook page, and half of my audience is League of Legends fans who will do everything they can to get away from that video as fast as possible because they don't care about it, my algorithm is just going to get fucked. And so we even had conversations about, like, should we create like a Yahoo Esports League? Like Blitz has kind of done this as well. Score for a while had Twitter pages that didn't really take off around like Score, LOL, etc. And I'm curious how you handled this, and do you think that this is a battle for you? Do you focus on one game whenever you're using this Facebook page? I don't want you to give me all your secret sauce, I understand, but I'm just super fascinated by this part of the conversation in general, because it was just something we struggled with so much.
Yeah, no, I want to be as transparent as I possibly can. There's never going to be one single player in the industry. I want as many of the publishers to succeed because it benefits us. So I would like to give tips to individuals. Those separate pages for dedicated games do not work. We've got DotEsports LOL, DotEsports CSGO, COD, Gears, all of them. Their traction and impressions are not impressive at all. How do you handle it? It's really freaking hard to be a publisher, and on Facebook right now they really are hitting hard on on pages that are just sharing links. So the number one tip that I can give everybody right now, if they want some benefit, is if all you are sharing are links on your page, Facebook is going to understand and identify that you are a publisher, and they're going to limit you to 2 to 4% reach of your page followers. That doesn't mean your fans don't want to consume your content. It just means that 1 or 2/3 are not clicking on your links, even though it's completely irrelevant for your League of Legends fans, and even though the other content is relevant to your Dota fans. You need to ensure that you're putting things in between those links. So maybe the good approach is to publish around 20 to 30 posts a day on your Facebook profile. Do not make all of those links. Publish some videos, publish some highlights that are relevant to your fans, publish engaging status updates, publish photos where they ask them a question. You can go to the DotEsports Facebook page right now, and you can see that we're uploading photos, that we try to engage our community. We want to upload videos when we can, whether they're informational or they're news-based. And they help because they split up the links that you're sharing. Because at the end of the day, we all know that we want as many clicks as we can get to the website. That doesn't mean maximizing your output is actually going to deliver that. It means identifying the right strategic method of not burning your users and playing fairly with the Facebook algorithm. And it works. It really works. I'm not saying that we're getting 30 or 40% of our reach. We're getting about 10 to 20%, which is 5 to 10 times what other publishers are getting just on our Facebook page alone, which really helps when you have hundreds of thousands of followers.
Yeah.
Sure. So, okay, Joe, a thing I was thinking of there when Riad was explaining like his method there and how he built the Facebook page is yes, knowing the approach is definitely a big part of it, and then being able to apply it and have the team. But I mean, Riad actually has like millions of dollars at his behest. I mean, that's kind of redundant to say he hires me, so he's got money. But he has millions of dollars at his. So he just knows the method. He can do what it takes to get it done. If you're building a site from scratch or with a limited amount of capital, isn't this a problem you run into? Like for example, okay, just to counterpoint this to when people, like as you said there, by the way, say this to me and Travis all the time. Why don't you just get all the best content creators and make your own site? Where the fuck would my starting egg be? Like use all my own personal savings so that Emily Rand can have a job. Yeah, love her, but not that much. I love my kids a bit more than that. So, I mean, not that there's any implication that she was or wasn't one of my children, right? Anyway, Joe, so what do you do then if you're starting out as a smaller site in that sense?
It was incredibly difficult. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest pitfalls we ran into is when we entered. You have to think about like a couple of years ago, these things were a little bit different, right? The Facebook algorithm hadn't changed to be quite as focused on video at that time. We're talking like late 2014, early 2015. It had begun to shift, but it wasn't quite as focused. And so when I created Slingshot, we thought that we would be able to scale up the Facebook page, maybe not, to get hundreds of thousands of likes within 6 months or a year, but we never imagined it would be as slow going as it was. And then once we did, we kind of were in a tough spot because our annual budget was like $155,000 a year. We didn't have a video person. Whenever we did any YouTube video, like that was something I was editing, and I did all of our social media too. And so
let me ask you something, actually. If you'd known what Riad just said there, because I didn't know all that stuff, by the way, about how Facebook works. If you'd have known that, would you, for example, have taken like some of those Stu Chew, like, he did the chew on this feature was sort of like it was sort of like a twit longer. It was like a tweet, but like a little bit expanded. Would you have like thrown some of them on the Facebook page or said to people who make video as well, make like a very brief short video version that's kind of a teaser for your video and put it on the Facebook? Does that have merit to it, do you think?
But it definitely has merit to it.
Because I didn't know a lot, I have to say.
No, the problem wasn't that we weren't like aware of it. The problem was resources and like who's going to make these videos at the output necessary. Like Riad was talking about posting maybe 20 things on Facebook, and you're going to have several videos per day. We maybe could have done like 1 or 2 a day maximum, just with the people we had. We just didn't have, the resources, and we frankly didn't really have anybody with the skills to be pumping out these videos, especially at what we were paying people, right? We were paying them to write articles and do these things, so we didn't have the right skill set. So I think really if I went back even further, I probably just maybe would have arranged the team a little bit differently, knowing what I know now and knowing how things shook out.
So Travis,
go ahead.
I had a question for you, right, which is, to go to the content creator side of things, I'm sure you have been told many times, especially since being made unemployed, just make your own Patreon, just make your own website, Travis.
Yeah.
You either make your own personal website, travisgafford.com, or make a website with, as he said, list off whoever their favorite content creators are. Just make your own site and have the fans fund it, Why is this not as simple? Because this is obviously a topic you addressed in a video recently.
Yes, yeah, I kind of want to go in. I'm planning on probably doing a video in the next week or so, just breaking down kind of so many of these questions that I get, like, why don't you have a Patreon? Why aren't you working for Riot? Why aren't you doing this? It's actually nice that you asked me this question, because right before you asked me it, I was going to point out, video is so goddamn expensive. Like, that's what people do not understand, is that people who can create videos are talented individuals who can be employed in a million different positions. And so having one of these people alone are very, very expensive, depending on what your content creator, like your main personality or whatever can be. Like, a video person can sometimes cost more. And not only that, but you have upfront costs around equipment and computers and all this kind of crazy stuff. And it takes a long time to produce video, because you have encode times and editing can be complicated. Thankfully my little 6 to 10 minute interviews are probably the easiest stuff, because they require the lowest amount of editing, but this is all just very, very intense, right? And so it's a good answer for people who say, like, why don't they just produce more video? And I think a lot of people were saying that when Slingshot went away, the League of Legends fans said they just do articles, but video is so expensive, and so people really have to understand that. And in understanding that, you start to realize a lot of the answers to the questions that I get around, like, why don't you just go independent? Why don't you become a Patreon person or whatever? Is that not only do I have to support myself, but I have to support, a video person, sometimes multiple video people, right? So I don't know if this is going to happen or not, but in the next month or so, Riot is going to announce who their franchise partners are or whatever. When I was at Yahoo, I was able to invite them into a studio and sit down at a table that had been properly lit with multiple cameras and multiple video people, all making sure that I could produce this great video. That is much harder to replicate. It's impossible to replicate by myself. Much harder with one other person. So just the costs in producing that one video, which could be 20 minutes or a little bit longer, are astronomical. There's a lot of cost there. The other thing is that going independent, you face a lot of the same challenges. My YouTube channel receives about 80% ad block rate. Duncan, you and I were just talking last night about how YouTube ad rev issues have popped up in the past several months on YouTube, and already you're getting blocked, right? But the little bit of money you're going to get can get fucked with all the time by their system flagging it incorrectly as impolite for advertisers. You're not going to make any money there. Patreons in esports, quite frankly, I feel like your and Richard's Patreon for your show is like one of the only examples.
Like, put it this way, I'll tell you outright. When he asked me that, because he just asked me it for fun on this one reunion show we did, like, how much would it take to do this every week? Yeah. And so I did give a reasonable number of what I would want, but I have to say I didn't think we were going to get it. Like, I actually was prepared for when it got halfway there to just say to Richard, like, all right, we'll just do it for half as much thing. I mean, I probably shouldn't say that now, because all the fuckers will just remove themselves from the Patreon. But just change. Believe it or not, I do have a heart, and sometimes do things not just solely motivated by greed. But I agree. I didn't think that was going to get it just for a fucking podcast. Yeah,
and so I think it's a testament to what the kind of presence that you guys have in that community.
It obviously helped that we had an established show from years before as well, which, by the way, we would have never had if we hadn't have had a sponsor. So it's not really that's obviously a very rare example for someone starting out with a YouTube channel, right?
Yeah. But to that point, I'm not convinced that I could get a Patreon funded to $2,500 just if I was like, I will give you guys everything. I'll do all my LCS content. Sure. This is the one thing I need. So I just don't have, and a lot of people have been asking me to the point that I might start one just so that people who want to support me, whatever, but I don't expect it to make more than a couple $100 a month. And to a lot of, this is the problem, is that there's a huge problem in talking and trying to be transparent when you are talking to this audience. No offense, audience, because a lot of people listening are college students that are like, only a couple $100 a month. That's crazy. You know, like that would help cover my rent, or like I could eat off of that for my entire month. The problem is I have to go to China for a month to do my job. And so to be clear, like my YouTube ad rev for October was like $1,500. And to a lot of people, they're like, holy shit, that's great. That paid for like one hotel room for 1 week of the 4 weeks that I was there. No flights, no paying my video producer, etc. Right? So it's incredibly expensive, very hard to do on your own. And even beyond that, like me and Ovly and Broden were rolling around BlizzCon with badges that say Travis Gafford Esports. Ovly interviewed a voice actor for Reinhardt, and he's like, oh, I've never heard of that outlet before. When you're on your own and you don't have like Yahoo or ESPN behind you, and no offense to Dot or to Slingshot, but I think you guys probably experience this as well. It's hard when you don't have a big name behind you to get exclusive stuff, you know? All these big non-endemic sports owners that are coming in, it's going to be way easier for ESPN to go get an exclusive with them than it would be for even Blitz.
Yeah, like, I mean, listen, I don't want to like shatter the illusions of any young up and coming esports.
It's terrible.
And journalists, you know. But believe it or not, if you just work for ESPN, there are some people who recognize the ESPN name and might give you a exclusive that they might not actually have given you if you'd been on a different website.
Yeah.
Not talking to anyone in particular, though. You know, just putting it out there in the community. Keep going, Travis. Yeah, keep going.
But you know, all that stuff goes, and then, it's just the reasons why it's hard is that the audience is not necessarily going to support you. Look, people have donated and subbed to my Twitch channel. You know, usually that's a couple $100 a month. That's nice. I am lucky enough that I have some money left from Yahoo, which has supported me in the last couple months. But like, I am rapidly running up to a deadline where I'm like, I either have to go work somewhere again. And by the way, I've talked to several different media outlets. One of the first people have called me in, and I sit there and I'm like, cool, we're going to spend the first 30 minutes of me telling you all the reasons you shouldn't get an esports media, because I am dedicated now to being very transparent with everybody, because I don't feel like starting another website that people are going to have false expectations about and I'll close. The first thing I say is 80% ad block rate, and they're just like, so all this is a way of saying, like, you can't really do it, in my opinion, at least with the type of content I produce, off of crowdfunding, and you can't do it off of normal ad rev. The model that I am considering, if I stay independent, which I am considering, there's a guy that I met in Shanghai. His name is Ryan Liu. A lot of people will know him. The joke is that he's Chinese Travis, because we're very similar in the type of content we create. But he has been struggling with all the same stuff in China.
So Travis has joined a triad, and they're going to be funding him and killing me.
No.
Rivals, right? I mean, okay, right. Go. Where's
that's a separate plan.
Yes.
But his model, he's had to change his business to 50% marketing agency and 50% ads, regular coverage site, media site. And so at Worlds, they were doing production work, kind of white label for ROG.
Okay. So the logic that gets you to the event, and then once you're at the event, you've taken care of some of the expenses, you can do your stuff, right?
Or the logic is, you could just become a white label production company, but you believe in esports media, so you're just going to use that to fund your ability to do the stuff. Yeah, pretty much, right?
Which in itself is a bit depressing, right? Because you're essentially saying you're going to do a real job, so on the side you can do that esports job, which is supposed to be your full-time job.
Yeah. And so
is that an indictment of where we're at?
Yes. Yeah, maybe. So I guess what I would say is I don't look, Worlds and BlizzCon are the two biggest events of the year in a lot of ways for their respective games. Sure. But I was able to secure that deal with Mobalytics. No offense to my former employers, but my Worlds coverage has never been sold before to an advertiser, but I was able to do it, so woohoo. And that was great, and they were a great partner, and we were able to do some really great stuff with them. I did a really little deal, but still a great deal with Omen by HP for BlizzCon. And so the question is, like, can I use these as proof points and case points for me to continue to, because like a lot of the big media companies, they're going to be looking for, if they want to do an advertising deal, they're going to want to start at like 200K, 300K, 400K, sometimes up to $1 million for a spend from an advertiser on their platform. I would love 200, 300, 400K to spend on Travis Gafford's YouTube channel, but I don't need that. It can be a lot more approachable. So anyway, this is something I'm exploring: is can I kind of wield this influencer status that I have with sort of my knowledge of media and some connections I have with friends that can do production stuff easily, and somehow turn this into some weird thing and maybe do some consulting on the side to stay independent. Okay. But I am like the exception to the rule. If I can pull it off, which I don't know, that's very unusual. And no offense to like Emily Rand or Kelsey Moser, but they're not going to be in the same position to be able to do that because we produce different types of content. So it's just it's very hard to be independent.
Okay, so this is a topic then, I think it's a little side route we can just go in for a minute, which is basically another way you can fund a site, which obviously, by the way, would be the number one way everyone would choose to fund it if possible, is to get a giant sponsor to sponsor the website or to sponsor a specific run of videos or something, And in a dream world, it would be, it would be Audi and Gatorade and all these huge companies. So as you say, if you could deliver them the numbers and they believed in the reach, you would get like $1 million or something ridiculous for a month of runs or whatever, right? Now, all I'll say on that topic, because obviously, Joe can speak to this. He was trying to get sponsorships, as he was saying. I'm sure Riad's been at least contemplating this and trying to figure out how you do it. All I will say is this, okay? My old girlfriend's cousin's dog used to work at an esports website. And believe it or not, it was a he. When he used to work at that esports website, they did try to sell massive sponsorships. But the problem is, that's an entire job in itself, knowing how to sell sponsorships. Advertising is obviously its own field. And so unfortunately, to get people who were qualified to sell advertising, and that's what they did for a living, they didn't know anything about esports. And so they never really managed to sell advertising for the esports content because they didn't know like specifically how to sell it to a person or how to explain the numbers or how to explain exactly what you were getting from it. So I'm sure they tried, but they never succeeded. So as Travis is saying here, just as an individual, he was able to get like sponsorships that my cousin's girlfriend's dog never managed to at the website that he wrote for. It's weird that it's always a he, isn't it? Yeah.
It's a little harder. Yeah.
It's a little Scottish Terrier.
2017. It's a little harder to their, it's a lot harder to secure a $300,000 and $500,000 sponsorship than it is for me to go do something with an endemic, website in the space. But yes, it is. It is true. People don't realize this, and I get it that if you want to sell to advertisers, you pretty much need a salesperson working full time. Yeah. They have to be a good esports salesperson. And by the way, the amount of people that are good esports salespeople in our space, very, very limited. And they're probably not going to work for a media site. They're going to go work for a team or a publisher or a league or something like that.
Well, that's the joke, isn't it? Like those people exist, but they're called Jack Etienne, fucking Steve Arneset, Alex Garfield 3 years ago. They can get a more profitable version of that job basically rather than trying to get that sponsor to sponsor a website. What would you say on this front, Riad? Because obviously, I assume this is something you consider within your approach, right? Trying to get a sponsorship or a headline sponsor for a series or something.
Yeah, without a doubt. Relying on programmatic advertising is nowhere near enough. The CPMs have already been discussed. Actually, for the Worlds, we had Acer sponsor our League of Legends content. I'm not too sure how many of you read esports on a regular basis, but all of our League of Legends content was sponsored by Predator Gaming, which is Acer's brand. So if you take a look at our content for LoL, it's at the top, which is really positive. That gives you a great return on investment, and it also helps you promote the brand in a very positive way where you're not putting on banner advertisements, but instead you're branding content that people care about. So I think it's a really positive approach moving forward for publishers to embrace that. But again, as what Travis said, a lot of these publishers are looking to spend significant budgets, and you need the traffic or the deliverables to justify that. And that requires a significant amount of investment upfront to hit that level before you can even have those conversations. And when you're having those conversations, they take about 3 to 6 months to materialize alone, because businesses that can spend that sort of money plan their budgets usually 6 months ahead, or maybe even a quarter ahead if you're lucky. And to get in on those, you have to compete with other businesses. And what you enter into is a really complex way of creating deals that people aren't used to. Because right now in esports, if you're trying to, say, sign a small deal, you're speaking usually with the CEO, you might be speaking with the head of marketing, and it's very straightforward. Businesses can shift their budgets from day to day. But when you're talking with brands that can pay what you're spending a month, you're going to be talking either with an agency that's not directly there, you're not speaking with a decision maker, and you have to get in way ahead of schedule, which requires you to forecast, which requires you to get in on early, and which requires you to have a dedicated salesperson, which again is more costs that aren't being justified. I'm not too sure about the other publishers in the space, but we're VC backed, which is phenomenal. I've got great angel investors and great venture capitalists on board, and they support us very well. And that has allowed us that ability to do that, but not for every other business. And again, that's what I go back to what I was saying earlier. It's all a matter about the numbers, and it's all about how fast do you want to grow it and how much money do you want to burn in that process. Because you can build a publisher and you can build it to become very successful, but you might be able to do it slower if you're spending a lot less and doing it a lot more organically. And it's a matter of objective and where you want to take your business, and that's usually the starting point.
So, Joe, I feel like this is a perfect time to bring you in, because, like, what's bizarre is kind of what was unsaid by Riad there, but he kind of alluded to it, was that because these companies that you want to sponsor you are used to spending so much money, right? To any naive listener, they might go, well, that's brilliant because you're going to ask for less money. No, they're not going to waste your time. They're going to think, right, well, why am I going to waste my time with a 20,000 sponsorship? I'm looking for someone who can deliver what I want for a 200K sponsorship. And by the way, no, they aren't just going to go, oh, I hope that they can do that. You know, you have to prove you can. So you have to sort of, you can't even really get in the room until you've hit a certain level, right? Because I assume you were out there, you were searching for people, you're in New York, probably got media connections, but it's tough to make the jump, isn't it, to get to the point where you can get these deals?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a fundamental problem in media in general where ever since the rise of the internet, there's just simply too many publications, right? Like, there's not really enough ad money to go around. And I'm not talking just esports, just in general.
Sure.
And so put yourself in the shoes of an advertiser. You don't have to go to a publication to reach your audience. Your audience does a million other things. They watch TV, they go on Facebook, they search on Google, they watch Teams, right? And so starting with non-endemics, right? Non-endemics are basically, the door is closed for an esports publication in a lot of ways. Like reaching out to BW3 or B-dubs, whatever, Arby's, like, it's not going to happen. Just too small, and they have these massive advertising budgets, and their ad buyers want to place these. I mean, they're human beings. They want to do as little work as possible. If they can go to one publication and sell their whole budget, then that's fantastic. So you're sort of limited to the endemics. And the endemics, well, they have tons of options to reach the audience. They can work with a team. They can work with a league, right? They can work with streamers individually and have a sort of a one-on-one relationship. And so news publishers are sort of at the bottom of that tier list. And so it becomes very difficult to get them on board. Now we go back to what we were talking about in the very beginning of the show with ad blockers and everything. And again, they're talking about how many impressions can you offer. And since ad block was so high, we came up with some innovative things, right? Like we offered people at a very discounted rate, like you can just sponsor the entire site for a month. And what we'll do is, instead of serving your ads, we're just going to build them into the site. They can't be blocked that way. There was very little interest. We just flat out.
Yeah, one of the reasons why, and I can speak to this too, a lot of people don't understand is that, okay, let's say you are Coca-Cola and you are going to spend $1 million on your World's coverage sponsorship. And so you decide, you know what, we'll be kind of smart about this, and instead of just giving $1 million to ESPN to produce something, or $1 million to one of the teams for that to do this big activation with them, we're going to drop 50 grand here, we're going to drop 100 grand on this site, we're going to sponsor this for this, or whatever. What they want to be able to know is they want to be able to track the users, right? So am I hitting across all these sites, 5 million people? Or 10 million people, or am I hitting the same people across all these sites because somebody goes to Reddit and then they click on all these different sites? In order to do that, these companies employ tracking pixels, which whatever, everybody has opinions about them. It's just a fact that they do this, right? And so the nice thing for them is they can say like, all right, we like the fact that we hit this person with an ad on Slingshot and GAMURS and Yahoo or DotEsports and Yahoo Esports or whatever, or we don't like that or whatever, but they've got this tracking pixel. Guess what? Adblock is also blocking, whenever you're running it, all the tracking pixels. And so part of the problem is that it is very, very difficult for sponsors to get the data that they can use to make informed decisions about how happy they were with their investment, or if they need to invest more or whatever, because even if you're just building in a banner ad, or you're doing some really cool, pretty, like, you know, slingshot with like a Coke can in the middle of it, like that is, they're not going to be able to get any of the data off of it, because they'll ask you to put a pixel on your site, and then the pixel will report 20% of the traffic that actually came in, because the pixel is getting ad blocked by 80% of the users.
Yeah.
So there's just a whole nother problem right there. Yeah. And I think it's also, just to throw this out there, it's The Ringer was the ESPN site, right?
Yes.
Or no, Grantland.
No, Grantland was the first one. That was the one where they...
Yeah.
Yes.
And Grantland, they did a similar thing where they did site-wide takeovers, is my understanding. Like Subway came in and sponsored it at some point in time, or maybe it sponsored The Ringer. But like ESPN tried this business model and also struggled with it. So, you know, there are existing examples of this in the real world, and they've also had issues with it there, I guess.
I would add something else too. One other thing is that at the other site I work for, we do, you know, anywhere from 25 to 30 million views a month, right? Yeah. That's considered like minuscule in politics. Like we do almost no direct advertising. The only direct advertising we do is because we're very well read in Washington, D.C. So we can sell ads into this one geographic area in D.C. for CPMs that are way higher than the national average. But that's only because of that audience. The rest of our audience throughout the rest of the country, you know, people just don't really care about it. You know, they'd rather just go spend all their money with Politico or BuzzFeed or Vox or something like that.
I mean, good luck getting 20 to 30 million impressions or visitors in esports without spending 20 to 30 million dollars. By the way, I mean not 20, but you get the point. Like the amount of money you need to spend for something like that is pretty dramatic.
Yeah, and so I had a great background in terms of creating ad campaigns. I mean, we've been doing it for years and years and years, but you just don't have the traffic, so you know the conversation never really gets going. It doesn't matter how cool your ad is. To Riad's point, I think like sponsored content, branded content, that's definitely a way to go in esports. I totally agree. So, you know, kudos on that.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. The only sort of point that I want to finish off with on just that note is, why would a brand go and advertise with a company that has to pay for their rent, that has to pay for lawyers, that has to pay for a million different things, when they can go advertise to an influencer that can reach the same amount of people, probably the same people, for significantly cheaper? For a brand, they might want $45,000, $50,000 for a month.
Good point, Riad. And if any brands are watching, youtube.com/Travis Gafford is we've got all sorts of advertising options. We can build you in at the end, at the beginning, shout outs, lower thirds, anything you want at a fraction of the cost, everybody.
But that's exactly right, though. Like when a brand wants to reach a certain amount of people that an influencer can satisfy, that's when a publisher needs to understand and have that brutal, honest conversation with the team that you are still very small fish. And again, I'm not trying to call anybody out, but you really need to build your company to a scale of which you are providing and you are engaging a significant amount more users than an influencer is, because otherwise you're competing in the wrong territory, and you're pissing off the influencers as well, because you're trying to take away small budget advertising deals when you should be focusing on engaging 5, 10, 15 million users. Again, as I mentioned, DotEsports has 3 million readers a month, and we still feel that is well below where we need to be to really engage bigger brands, big companies to come in and try to engage with our users. Because at the end of the day, to get ad block, people that don't even have ad block on don't even care about banner advertising anymore. It's becoming this real thing that is just sort of implanted in everybody's brain, that when you see an ad, you ignore it and you go direct to the content. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Tasty brand on Facebook that's owned by BuzzFeed. They do brilliant advertising where they will create recipes that work with the actual brand that they're promoting, whether it's Schweppes or Pepsi or whoever they're advertising with. And then they put the Facebook brand of that page in the URL, they tag it in the post, and they embed it directly in the content. There is no ad block that can remove that. And the thing is, people that are watching that video are actually really curious about how they're using Pepsi, for example, to make buffalo chicken wings, or whatever that is. That
What's
works
ironic?
really well.
What's ironic about that is BuzzFeed is adding banner ads to their site. So somewhere, I mean, they led the charge in terms of like no more banner ads. Like banner ads are dead. So I'm curious, like, you know, why exactly is that decision being made? I mean, you know, you can't draw any conclusions. I don't know their traffic, but I would assume it's because they're not really driving the revenue that their VC demands, and they're struggling to get to the valuation in terms of like an IPO or an exit of some kind, and they need more revenue, and so they're kind of going back and saying, where can we scrape things together?
Banner ads aren't dead. I just want to clarify, banner ads are dying. I think they're two different things. With the internet, when things die, they might take 5 or 10 years, depending on the size of which. And with banner ads, billions and billions are being served every single hour. So it means that banner ads are still delivering some sort of return. DotEsports will become profitable over the next quarter or two, just from banner advertising and also programmatic advertising. Everything else on top of that is then a sort of a benefit and a bonus.
Hey, congrats, man.
Yeah,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That's a really, really good to hear. Like, I don't think people understand how actually like real that is to hear, and how you guys might be the first ones to do it. I don't know.
Thank you. No, we're extremely excited with where it's going. But what I'm trying to say is the goal is deliver really good content and then deliver connections to brands that really matter. Banner ads and programmatic advertising sometimes, if done correctly, can do that. But the best goal, and Travis and Joe, you both hit the nail on the head, is getting brands to sponsor your content that is meaningful, because then your audience will care about it. They'll engage and they'll come back more and more often. And then everything sort of flows from that, and you get more users and more revenue. It's maths, it's arithmetic.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Joe, I have one topic I want to just close with you, because we haven't heard your thoughts on this, but obviously one of the motivating factors of doing this episode was Slingshot did try kind of a last gasp attempt where you made a Patreon and you wanted to hopefully fund a certain amount. I think it wasn't something like $20,000 a month you needed to hit or something. And obviously two approaches people will say. I mean, we went from Travis's angle, which is, you know, the actual content creator himself. But on your side, people will say either, why not do a Patreon thinking like, you know, you can crowdfund, or they'll say, why not have a paywall, right? What would you say to these two answers? Why couldn't these have saved Slingshot?
Well, in terms of why we didn't create a paywall, I think that I didn't think, maybe I'm incorrect, but I didn't think that people would just drop what they're doing and start paying for our content when we made a paywall. I thought that if we were going to use a paywall of any kind, we needed much more runway than we had at the time to try to build that audience. And any users that would stop coming to the site at that time would have hurt our ability to raise capital, which is what I was trying to do. Now, obviously, I didn't raise the capital, so it's a moot point. In terms of the Patreon, I had always wanted to do a membership of some kind. In hindsight, I wish we would have started it earlier, but there came a point where I was like, look, we're either going to run out of money, and I want to see what this would have been, like what is going on, what could we have done with a membership system of some kind. But also, I continued to run the business as if the funding was going to come. I didn't want to just assume we weren't going to get it. And I did want to build a membership system out over the course of the next couple of years, because I still fundamentally believe, and I believe this, it's one of the reasons I got into the publishing business in the first place, is I don't think that ad-supported media, just ad-supported media, is sustainable in the long term. I think you need membership revenue. I think you need advertising revenue. I think e-commerce should be in the picture. I think there's a long content licensing. There's a number of ways to monetize content that I wanted to eventually get into, and we weren't able to. And then I think the last point was, you know, I kind of thought, I want to see what happens with this membership, or with a Patreon, with a membership system, just because, like, let's say it does go up in flames, I want the other publishers to see what happens. and I want someone to be the first mover that really tried it.
Okay,
now maybe
you were basically like Leonidas in 300. You just wanted to touch the God Emperor with that spear, but you knew you were going to die. But what a noble act it was that might rally the Spartan troops to win it wherever it was at they had that battle later that they stopped the movie and didn't show.
Yeah, partially. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you did a good job. Nice effort.
Yeah, obviously. What are you going to do? I mean, didn't work out, so.
I know we're wrapping up, but I just kind of want.
I have another point I want to talk about, Travis.
Okay.
It's my show.
I have a couple things before we wrap up that I want to throw out there because this has been kind of doom and gloom, but I have a couple points. You go for it, Duncan. Your show.
So what I wanted to ask was this, from the content creator side of things again, another reason why I think it's really tough, even from people who are content creators, to know what do other people make, why do they make that, what's the mechanism by how they got a certain amount, The numbers aren't shared transparently that much unless people are basically personal friends and they tell the truth. So one of the weird things I've noticed, and I'm sure, Riad, you must be able to talk to this, is that part of the problem is from the outside, as I referred to before, there are a lot of big names. And it just seems like normally you get a big name from being very good. So you're good at writing or making videos or whatever. But unfortunately, the difference between being good and making great content and being good and getting lots of hits is very different. And I mean, I'll even, just to make it sound like I'm not being self-aggrandizing, there's obviously people we know on the internet who aren't actually good but get lots of hits. You can have a kind of a counterintuitive aspect like that, as you see with clickbait and very low effort content, But one of the problems I've noticed within the industry and trying to help other people out in the business is people who get to a point, and this is kind of actually touching on something that you were saying before about like sponsoring an influencer instead of a site. One of the big problems we got to in esports was that if someone is, so I'll use myself for example, right? In theory, if I post content, like an article, let's make up a random article, the history of NIP in CSGO, right? If I post that article, because in general, a lot of my content hits come from Reddit, come from Twitter, come from Facebook, and a lot of them come from name value, those, I will probably get 90% of the same traffic, whether I posted it on my own Medium website, on GAMURS, on almost any website. So in a weird way, like sometimes it won't matter for me necessarily whether it directly makes sense for the website to pay me exactly the amount I ask for, because since I basically bring the traffic instead of joining a site which has the traffic, perhaps some small website, for whatever reason, would be willing to pay me most of their budget just to have one person who did that, and I would be somehow subsidized by their, as you said, news posters or whatever it might be, But the problem is, first of all, there's the content creator like that, where that's obviously a very unique position only a few people are in. But then one of the real problems I see is there's people who are just as good as me or better who fall halfway between the 2 points though, and they don't get enough traffic to necessarily justify being like a spend where you offset them against someone else. They don't get enough just off their own stuff to get a lot, and so they're the people I feel like are in a really bad spot, because if you look around the industry, a lot of the really big names actually don't write for the biggest sites nowadays. A lot of them are independent or quasi-independent, or have some little small deal with one website, where it's probably like that. What would you say to this topic? Because it's definitely a weird one, and there's a lot of nuance to it.
I think we've got to break that down into two to really get into the reasoning why. I think we sometimes might misuse the term best writer with also the most popular writer. I really think that there are so many talented writers in esports that just don't have the pull that other individuals that are really talented as well, but also have a really popular name. Thorin, obviously, you're one of them. You've got some amazing followers that will consume any content that you produce, no matter where you publish it, whether it's YouTube, Medium, DotEsports, or when it was GAMURS. And I think that's a pretty straightforward one. You're talented and you have a big name. People are going to want to consume the content, whether it's informational or opinionated or whatever it is, because they care to hear what you have to say. And to touch upon one of your other points as well, it depends on the brand that you're writing with. Other companies can deliver more views on top of what you are bringing in. Again, for some transparency, we own the Ultimate Network on Facebook. We have over 4 million or so followers and likes, which means that when we publish content on Facebook, sometimes we drive 20 to 40,000 clicks organically, whether that's CSGO, League of Legends, and Overwatch. And that means the content that you would be producing on a company like ours, which you already do, would then have added added views on top of that.
Yes.
But on the other side of the spectrum is when you have a really talented writer that doesn't have a big name, they can produce the content that people care about and actually want to read, but they need somebody that can then go and distribute it, whether that's through Reddit, whether that's through Google,
yes.
whether that's through Facebook. It is what it is. They need somebody that can go and say, all right, you've published this really good analysis on 2 teams playing. Who actually gives a fuck about this content, and where are we going to distribute it? And that's what matters. And the reason why they're in trouble is not many companies can both A, afford to pay for good journalists,
yes.
and B, can distribute the content meaningfully in a sustainable way. The thing that I really want to sort of send a message home to all the viewers is it needs to be sustainable. It doesn't matter if you acquire 5 million readers in 1 month because you threw 300 grand at the wall. If you can't do that for the next 3-4 years, then your business is going to fall into the ground, unfortunately. And that's the thing. It's a balancing act. You have to find a level of distribution, you have to find a level of quality, and you have to find a level of reasonable monetization so you can stay afloat.
Yeah, because I mean, for example, to touch on what Joe said there, which is an idea I've thought about before. Like, funnily enough, I don't think about it for myself because I'm doing all right, but I usually think about it whenever it's like someone who's a friend of mine and I think really talented is having trouble getting work. What I often think is, first of all, as I've mentioned, I either go to Riad and I'm like, we've got to hire this person, they're so fucking good, oh, they'll get better, I promise. And then obviously, as a ruthless businessman, he just goes, the numbers don't add up. I worship the numbers, you know, like, no, not entirely like that, but that's the short version, right? And what happens is, I have really sat down and tried to figure out so many times how it could work, right? And the problem is, here's the ultimate scenario I come to, Travis. I don't know if you've thought similar things, but basically, I could do it. I'm pretty sure I could get 3 or 4 big names, and then I could get like the 5 people I think should be big names, but you know, for whatever reason, they aren't as marketable, they haven't worked on personal aspects of how to sell a brand, etc. So I could definitely make a site where we all made all right money, but the problem is, it goes either 2 ways. One, either I'm basically doing it as sort of a charity thing and I'm willing to sort of get a lot of money for what I would do and me and the other big names would do. We'd get a lot of the traffic, you know, and then I'm sort of subsidizing the others, which while it would be very nice, unfortunately, I actually thought, like, I ran the trajectory forwards and I thought, in a way, don't I actually fuck those people though? Because then I make them think they have a whole career based on this and that they're making this money, it's market value. And now actually I might even bankrupt some like little guy who comes in because he thinks, oh, what, you have to pay people $500 an hour. You know, there's actually a lot of negative consequences could happen from what is actually objectively, you know, a good thing to do for people. But then the other side of the equation is, let's say one of the content creators for this site wants to make a lot. He wants to make as much as he can. He wants to make the most, you know, perfectly reasonable position. Well, now I have to go the other way, don't I? I have to say to these smaller content, well, someone's got to give on this, because if we could all make enough just off our own content, why would we be banding together in the first place? It actually doesn't work from any angle when I've thought about it.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, it's just so hard to try and figure out how to make this stuff work. You know, you're kind of leading towards one of the points. I mean, one of the other difficulties that exist is, okay, so I went to Boston for the summer finals. There were 50 outlets that showed up that weekend. Now, a lot of them were local folks, but there are, like, it's Slingshot went away, you know, we all mourn, but in its place, 5 new esports media sites will spawn. And I think it kind of drives me crazy because no one, I think, is doing legitimate due diligence ahead of this stuff. Sorry, I shouldn't say no one. A lot of people are probably not. And so, you know, they'll pop up, they'll get VC funding, they'll pay a bunch of people really good numbers like you were talking about.
Yes. Yeah.
And then everyone will have this expectation. And then,
well, put it this way, Travis, when people say that naively, why don't they just get all the best writers? Right. First of all, you've literally worked for 2 websites that did that. I've worked for one of them. I've had job offers from a couple of other ones. There've been at least 2 or 3, and all of them end up either closed down or the same writers, now you just don't know it as a viewer, work on a freelance basis and are not employees. So it kind of has been tried, right?
Yeah, it's been tried. And I just think, like, it's weird. You know, like I said, DotEsports might be the first site to hit profitability, and they've been very, very smart about it and have had strategic acquisitions that'll have helped them and run on a, you know, like they don't have a studio and produce hours and hours of video content with huge fucking video name. Like, you guys have been very, very smart about it. So it's a little, the takeaway for me at Boston was like, there are too many media sites, and I want there to be multiple media sites. I want them to succeed. I don't know if we need this many. And so, by the way, if you're watching this, please, like, consider whether or not you should do this. The ironic thing is, there's a world in which I start another media site next year or something like that, take a gig doing this.
So if 2 sites could just close down so Travis could open his, that would be
great.
Thanks.
That would be great.
Give up your dreams.
I'll consider acquiring you if you have a big Facebook page.
Okay,
so
well, if Riad just agrees to close down his, Travis, then we've got the equation sorted on this show.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah,
that's what it was all about in the end. Yeah.
Just start charging him a lot, Duncan. But I think the reason I bring that up is because I think we've done a lot of naysaying and a lot of doom and gloom on this show. I continue to think that there are ways in order to make this thing succeed. So you can take a look at TechCrunch, which I don't have any specific extra information from. They're owned by AOL, which was acquired by Verizon, and then Yahoo. So I don't have any extra information based on the fact that I was there. But it's pretty clear that TechCrunch is a site that exists, and then they have all these conferences, right, and all these different events, and TechCrunch Disrupt, which is a big startup thing in the tech world. And so you have an instance there where you have a website that's a brand that kind of in some way exists to actually promote like their conference business. And I think there are a lot of examples like that where you have media sites that are kind of like a loss leader or a break even for something else that exists. Okay. And so that's kind of my take now whenever I go into any meeting about, like, hey, we want to create an esports media startup, or we're an established media company, we want to do this. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Here's 30 minutes of all the reasons why you shouldn't do this and why it'll fail. Let's spend 30 minutes talking about a way in which this can be still strategic for your business and a smart investment.
Well, I mean, I'll give you an example, Travis. Here's an obvious one, because as far as I know, it does exist. I just won't speak on the exact company because I'm not sure what the exact ties are. But for example, let's say in 3 years, every big esports league has a television deal. If you are the television company who does that, why not? Yes, it's going to be a loss leader. Have your own coverage website, which feeds into letting people know when it is, but also having the extra content, and you can make both kind of. They kind of
I think Turner started producing stuff with Bleacher Report.
Yes.
Who knows if this is what you're talking about?
Exactly.
Turner started producing stuff with Bleacher Report whenever they started doing E-League. So yeah, there's a lot of smart stuff here. You end up in a world where you can pull exclusive content from the league that you're producing on television to this thing. ESPN.com obviously benefits a lot on their sports side from the fact that they are a broadcast partner for so many of these leagues.
Yes.
So there are numerous ways, I think, for a media site to exist and make money, and not all of them are based off of advertisements or even branded content or anything like that. And so I continue to believe that there's a way for this to exist. Yeah. So I might still do it. Just understand that if you are somebody who's thinking about making a media site, or you recently launched a media site, or you're thinking about this, also realize that all the stuff we talked about here are the realities in the space. And so it's very smart for you to start doing this stuff. And by the way, if you're an esports media site and you're like, it's fine, we got VC, we don't have to worry about revenue, we'll just keep it going. And by the way, it's esports right now, so you can just get another round of funding, more rounds, my valuation keeps going up, Newzoo reports 40%, that's all going up. You are being irresponsible and you're fucking other people over. Okay. Please don't do that.
Right, well, let's make that the way we end then. What we'll do is we'll go around the circle and we'll just kind of, what positives are there? Like, Riad, aside from be you or copy you or steal your business plan, what positives are there? Like, how does this turn around? What's like a positive end to end on? If there is indeed one. If there isn't, then just kill it.
There's a lot of positives. I think the most positive thing I probably want to finish off with is the community is growing. The community is growing, the community is maturing, and the community understands, and I think many people will disagree, but the community understands the value of good journalistic content. I think with the shutdown of multiple websites this year, Slingshot, Yahoo, WWG, and multiple others, I think people are finally starting to understand, hey, shit, this thing doesn't cost nothing to create. This thing actually takes a lot of time and effort, and they're actually starting to treat, I'd say, the websites a bit better. And I'm not saying it's happened already. I'm saying it's beginning to happen, and I think that's a really good thing. And also the community is just growing in size, and I think that's really important. As that grows, that means the revenue in it grows. That means the amount of just general rewards that the publishers and the companies receive will also increase. I think it just becomes better to be in esports as long as you have a right and sound strategy.
Okay. Joe?
I think that, yeah, I think the positives are that there actually are a number of monetization methods that are open to esports that other, verticals don't have. Like, I think e-commerce is a big one in terms of like affiliate links and things like that. There's ways to monetize that. I think that the esports audience itself, once you can get to them, that 18 to 35 or whatever demo, is actually sought after by advertisers, right? So that's a demographic that people want to hit. So, once you can get to that size, then Riad was talking about, he was able to sponsor League of Legends coverage. That's fantastic. That's great. I also think that esports is growing, and there's that old saying, like a rising tide lifts all ships. So yes, there's a wave to ride there, and I also think that there's probably some good news on the horizon. Like if you follow the trade press, millennials are starting to spend more money on subscriptions and directly support content more and more now. If that filters into esports, we'll see, but the trends are there. And I also think that to Travis's point, there are events businesses that can be created by media companies that can sustain other the actual content creation. I think what's the most positive, or what's positive to me about what Riad is doing, is that he's built a company that we just had Slingshot, we just had the content, right? That's all we had. That's all we could afford, for better or worse. But he's built other, he has other sites around that to build out the GAMURS network. And so it's much more of a diversified media company that will have diversified revenue streams that could subsidize journalism and, just create network effects. So there are paths to doing it. There are paths to being successful. And I think, we'll find those out, or other people will find those out, and I think we'll be okay, or esports will be okay.
Right. What I'll say for my kind of closing note is this: I think you should only talk about what you know. So I'll just talk about what I know can be positive. Okay. So first of all, one way, if you're not very good at branding and marketing yourself, is you could hope that you catch the eye of, say, me or Travis. It's mainly me, because I'm just a very magnanimous person, and if I like your work, I'll probably retweet it. I might even submit it to Reddit if I think it's good. But here's the problem that a lot of the content creators go: they think that the secret to getting me to like their work and to do all this stuff is to be very sycophantic. And while yes, obviously I do think I should be called the best and a great person, all this stuff, actually I'm quite good at telling when that's fake. So actually that doesn't help at all. Just go the other. This is what people don't do. This is counterintuitive. Just go the other route. Just don't ever insult me, because if you ever insult me, by the way, I'll pretend you don't exist for 10 years and you'll just be breaking stories at ESPN or whatever website, whoever you might be. I'm talking about. I don't even know why I said ESPN. Again, it just came on the top of my head. I think someone mentioned it earlier. So you can do that, or here's a positive I'll end the show on. I actually do have a feature that I'm going to do on my YouTube channel where the entire premise is to hopefully expose people who are from my viewer base to new content creators or other content creators that I think are very good, and kind of bridge the gap where those people aren't as good at, branding themselves. And sometimes I think actually the problem is, for example, people who do fantastic long articles that are text, some people won't get into that, but if you kind of gave them a little taste of it in a conversation, maybe someone would get interested and hooked and go in it. So I won't reveal too much. It'll be coming out soon. So in the end, it all comes back to me, but that's just how these shows go. That's why I host them. So that's going to be the end.
This is PPD. You guys are watching Thorin's YouTube channel. One of the only men with a bigger ego than even myself.